The Millionaire's Promise. The city was always busy, even in the early hours of the morning. The streets hummed with the sound of buses, car horns, and footsteps rushing across cracked sidewalks. Yet, among the noise and hurried faces, there were people who seemed invisible, those who had no homes, no offices to rush to, and no warm beds waiting for them. One of them was Linda, a woman in her late 30s. She sat near the entrance of an old library, bundled in a torn coat, her hair tangled, her hands wrapped tightly around a paper cup that rattled whenever she shook it for coins. Most people walked past without a glance. Some gave her a look of pity, others of annoyance, but very few stopped. Across the street, in a tall glass building that sparkled in the sunlight, lived a man of a different world, Richard Miller, a millionaire who had made his fortune in real estate. He was known for his sharp business mind, his polished suits, and his large mansion outside the city. But what most people didn't know was that Richard carried a quiet loneliness. He had money, houses, and cars, but he had no family of his own. For years, Richard had dreamed of being a father. But relationships had always failed him, and age was slowly closing the door on his chances. Adoption felt too complicated, and surrogacy seemed clinical. Then one morning, as he stood by his office window sipping black coffee, his eyes fell on the woman sitting across the street, the same woman he had seen for months. Something about her weary face, her silent endurance, stirred something inside him. That afternoon, Richard did something unusual. He crossed the street and walked up to Linda. She looked up in surprise, expecting a coin. Instead, he spoke softly. "Do you have a minute?" he asked. Her eyes narrowed with suspicion, but she nodded. They sat on the cold steps together. Richard explained his strange idea. He wanted to pay her, provide her with food, shelter, and medical care, if she agreed to carry a child for him. At first, Linda thought it was a cruel joke. A millionaire offering such a proposal to a woman who had nothing. But Richard's eyes were steady, and his voice was calm. "I'll make sure you're safe," he promised. "You won't be left on the streets. And when the child is born, you'll be free to decide if you want to stay in their life or not." Linda thought about it for days. Hunger gnawed at her stomach. The cold nights pressed hard on her bones. In the end, she agreed, not only for the money, but because a small part of her longed for a sense of purpose. Months passed. Richard rented a modest apartment for Linda, furnished it with simple but clean essentials, and arranged doctor's visits. For the first time in years, she slept on a soft bed and ate warm meals. Slowly, her face regained color, and her eyes lost some of their constant fear. Richard visited often, sometimes bringing groceries, sometimes just sitting in the small living room, asking how she was feeling. Their conversations were quiet. He learned that Linda had once been a teacher before life unraveled, job loss, a failed marriage, medical bills she couldn't pay. She had slipped through society's cracks until there was no one left to help her. As Linda's belly grew, Richard felt something he hadn't felt in years: hope. He would place his hand gently on her stomach and feel the faint kicks of life. He imagined holding his child, teaching them, giving them all the love he never had the chance to give. But when the day finally came, and Linda went into labor, Richard's carefully built expectations began to tremble. The hospital room was filled with the steady beeping of machines, the smell of antiseptic, and the muffled sounds of nurses rushing in and out. Richard stood outside the delivery room, pacing back and forth, his palms sweaty. Hours passed before a nurse finally came out and motioned him inside. Linda lay on the bed, exhausted, her face pale but relieved. In her arms, wrapped in a soft blanket, was the child Richard had been waiting for. But when he saw the baby, Richard froze. The infant's skin was pale, but marked with a distinct birthmark across the cheek. Its eyes, though barely open, carried a shade of blue Richard had seen before. Not in himself, not in Linda, but in a man he once knew, his late brother, Daniel. Memories rushed back like a tide. Daniel, who had been Linda's first love many years ago. Daniel, who had left suddenly, never to return. Richard had never known the full story. And now, staring at the child, he understood. He turned to Linda, his voice trembling. This child, he looks like." Tears filled her eyes. She nodded slowly. "Daniel was the father of my first child, Years ago. I never told anyone. He left before he knew. And now, somehow, it feels like he's back through this little one. Richard sank into a chair, his heart pounding. The twist of fate was overwhelming. The child he had longed for, the child he had arranged through money and planning, was tied not only to him but to the brother he had lost. In the weeks that followed, Richard struggled with the revelation. At first, he felt betrayed. He had thought this would be his fresh start, his carefully controlled path to fatherhood. But the child was more than that. He was a living connection to family he had almost forgotten. Every time Richard held the baby, named Michael, he saw flashes of Daniel's smile, Daniel's mischievous eyes. It hurt, but it also healed something deep inside him. Linda, too, changed. Motherhood softened her again, reminded her of the woman she once was before the streets claimed her. She decided not to walk away after all. Instead, she chose to stay close, to help raise Michael with Richard. Their relationship was not romantic, nor was it simple. But it was built on something stronger than convenience, shared loss, shared hope, and a child who carried both their past and their future. Over time, Richard found himself less concerned with how the child had come to be and more focused on what the child meant. Michael laughed easily, grabbed his finger with tiny fists, and fell asleep on his chest. For the first time, the mansion did not feel empty when Richard returned home. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky with streaks of orange, Richard sat in the garden with Michael asleep in his arms and Linda sipping tea beside him. The air was calm, filled only with the sound of crickets and the gentle rustle of leaves. Richard looked at Linda and whispered, "I thought I was buying a future. But what I found was something I didn't even know I had lost, a family." Linda smiled, her eyes soft with gratitude. Sometimes life gives back in the strangest ways. And in that quiet moment, surrounded by the glow of twilight, Richard understood that wealth had never been the answer. Love, in its messy, unexpected form, was the treasure he had been seeking all along.